That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Going to set us on fire. Round of applause for Nigel, please. Welcome to Bitcoin Amsterdam, Nigel. What are you doing at a Bitcoin conference?
Well, I led a political insurgency. I took on the establishment. They all had one view. I had a very different view. I was written off as being mad, bad, dangerous, and they were the nicer words that were used about me. And what I think is happening in this hall, and what I think is happening with Bitcoin, is we're seeing a similar type of insurgency. This is an economic insurgency, and it's being driven and led by people who are worried about the sheer size, scale of big government. And hey, they want to be free, they want to be independent, masters of their own destiny. So for me, it's a perfectly natural place to be. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You're absolutely right. Bitcoin is a politically unpopular idea. We get called all kinds of names. We get accused of all kinds of things, supporting terrorists and money laundering, when actually Bitcoin is just wanting to deliver economic freedom. Brexit was a politically unpopular idea. You weren't given much of a hope. I told you beforehand, I went to bed and assumed that the vote had been lost and woke up and we were leaving the EU. How do you build support for a politically unpopular idea when you know it's in yourself, you have that belief that it is within the best interest of the people?
Yeah. Well, the first thing to remember is any new idea, whether it's a scientific idea, a political idea, an economic idea, any new idea will automatically face the opposition of the entire establishment because they own the settled status quo. They're very comfortable. They're doing nicely. They don't want anything to come along and disrupt. And I think Bitcoin's seeing that. You know, just have a look. I mean, take the UK, for example. Look at the way UK media covers Bitcoin. Look at the way the BBC cover Bitcoin. You know, it's only ever in the news if the price has fallen sharply. They listen to and they quote the governor of the Bank of England, who is, I think, the most useless governor of the Bank of England we've ever had. I mean, the guy is a moron. God knows how he's there. And the governor of the Bank of England says that Bitcoin is valueless. Valueless. Nothing about his own fiat currency that we've had ever since we left the gold standard. Nothing about inflation heading up towards 20%. So that's the coverage that you'll get. Bitcoin is valueless. It's a great big Ponzi scheme. So you have to understand and accept that narrative is not going to change in the short term. But I'm pleased to be here today with an insurgent TV channel, GB News, and we are covering this today. We'll be doing shots in. I'll be broadcasting a live show from here this evening. So you'll find some friends, but not very many. How do we build momentum behind the campaign to leave the EU? Frankly, we did it by going out around the country, and in the early days, it was one person at a time. It was one person at a time, and then suddenly you're having events such as this, and it grows and grows and grows. And my own, and you know, we've each Peter got our own way of doing things. My own particular speciality was to visit as many pubs as I possibly could around the United Kingdom.
Sounds great.
Yeah, so no, literally, UKIP as a political force was a grassroots upwelling. I was a completely unknown. I was a businessman. I was an outsider. I had no profile, but we built this from the ground up, and I think that's what's happening with Bitcoin.
How do you build a coalition within the political circles? Because one of the problems that Bitcoin will have is potentially being over-regulated. You know, it is a tool for freedom. It's a freedom technology. It's a exit from the fiat system, which we know is collapsing in front of us. How do you build political support? I don't understand how Whitehall works. I don't know how government works, but you've worked with these people.
Well, I mean, the answer to that is that government and Whitehall at the moment aren't working at all. Look at the mess we're in. honestly, if we sat down now with 20 current serving members of the Westminster Parliament, I would be very surprised if at least 15 of that 20 knew almost nothing about Bitcoin at all, other than they'd heard it might be a Ponzi scheme. So the level of knowledge amongst those who ultimately may well be regulating this, and when you think about that, it's pretty frightening, the level of knowledge is very, very low indeed. And I think it's incumbent upon people like you. You know, you do your podcast, you're very successful, you're great at reaching the grassroots, but I do think lawmakers need some real education, and that's not an easy thing to do. You know, that's the old-fashioned lobbying, education, but it needs to be done. And you know, I was 21 years in the European Parliament. They were very pleased to see the back of me because I was a damn nuisance when I was there. But I was astonished time and again. I would see pieces of legislation being voted on by lawmakers who didn't have the first clue about the subject they were debating. So the worry, I think, with Bitcoin is that it's painted out to be the Wild West, it's painted out to be the haven of criminals, you know, all these negatives. So I think the education campaign can't come soon enough. There was some debate. I mean, when Rishi Sunak was challenging Liz Truss, he was talking about London potentially being a bit of a centre for trading Bitcoin, which would necessarily mean the regulation that follows. So really, you've got to get out and meet as many MPs as you possibly can. And this is not left-wing or right-wing. Bitcoin is completely apolitical, but I think a big job needs to be done.
Can you help me meet some of these people?
Oh, I can help you meet some of these people, no problem at all. And I think I want London to succeed. I think London is naturally a great trading centre, a great hub centre. But also, look, you know, what we saw during the pandemic were governments right across the world taking away our liberties, taking away our rights in a way we'd never seen even in wartime. And the frightening thing is, they would do it again at the drop of a hat. And so my real fear, you know, with all of this, is central bank digital currencies. That is the biggest fear I've got. That will take away our economic freedom. And already we've got, and this is not some sort of fantasy. This is not some sort of way out there Alex Jones stuff on the internet. You know, you've got 100 world governments discussing very openly the prospect of central bank digital currencies. So there's some real battles to fight. And ultimately, why am I a fan of Bitcoin? Because I feel with Bitcoin, number one, the technology has been proved to work. And you know what? It's getting better. Number two, government cannot come near it. Government cannot tell me what I can and cannot do with Bitcoin. And in that sense, it is the ultimate freedom. It is the ultimate liberty. And if we work cleverly with lawmakers, forget the European Union. Forget the European Union. They're, you know, they will overregulate. They always do. But I think there's a good chance in America, there's a good chance in the UK, there's a good chance perhaps in South America too, that we can actually get a sensible level of regulation.
Well, look, we are seeing that. I spend most of my time in the US working on the show. I travel around a lot and I've met a lot of people. There's lots of political support getting behind Bitcoin, not just from the Republican Party. We've seen a bipartisan bill with Senator Gillibrand. I wrote to my MP of North Bedfordshire, and all I got was a letter back explaining me how Bitcoin is used again by terrorists and worried about the impact on climate change. And so I've felt that difficulty. One of the challenges I've found, and you all know what this is like, is By the way, in the US, I'm considered a liberal, but in the UK, I'm considered a right-wing conspiracy theorist. How do you deal with the challenge of communicating these ideas of freedom and liberty with Bitcoin without being just classed as a conspiracy theorist? I had it with, by the way, with CBDC. I wrote a thing about CBDCs on Facebook, and one of my friends' mums blocked me because she said I'm a conspiracy theorist.
Do you know what? I mean, my attitude towards receiving abuse, and I would think I receive more abuse than any political figure in Britain in modern times. My attitude towards that abuse, and you're going to get it, and the higher profile you become, the more of it you will get. My attitude towards it is just ignore the whole bloody thing, because you can't defend against negatives. Ignore it all. Ignore it all. And if it ever gets you down for a moment, we'll pour a glass or something. Forget about it and move on. As I said at the start of this talk, any radical, fresh, new idea, whether it's political, scientific, or economic, will always, always, always come up against this. And Gandhi made the comment about his campaign for India to break out of the British Empire. And what did he say? He said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win. And I think you'll know you're winning when they really, really start getting nasty. So don't let it offend you. It means you're getting near the target and they're getting scared.
Well, the interesting thing here as well, with Brexit, the UK actually has an opportunity right now to become the centre of Bitcoin in Europe. It has a chance to lead. It has a chance to build some economic foundations for businesses to operate out of the UK. So it feels like an opportunity. I'm going to come to that, but I think it would be worth talking a little bit more about Brexit. Whilst you're here, people would want me to do that.
Yeah.
Do you think Brexit has been a success? And what parts of it do you think have failed? Because I see this economic opportunity here, and I don't see us taking advantage of it.
We have not taken advantage of this. We have not put in place, under Boris, we didn't put in place a single supply-side reform. You know, I was a businessman for 20 years before getting involved in politics, and for the last 9 of those years, I ran my own company. I saw endless streams of legislation coming onto my business, having to employ compliance officers, having to have ever bigger legal bills, ever bigger accounting bills, and I realized all this stuff that was being put upon me didn't protect my customers at all. Wasn't for any benefit for the consumer. And I think the European Union has proved itself to be a grossly over-regulated model. And within that model, there is no means of changing legislation. You know, the European Parliament cannot propose legislation. It's all done by the European Commission. It's in the hands of the unelected bureaucrats. So to me, the opportunity with Brexit was to start slashing back excessive regulation. I believe in free markets. I think what we've got and what Europe's developed is a long way away from capitalism. It's corporatism. It's big business, big banks, big government, all working together. And it's now become woke corporatism, which is even worse than it was before. So, no, honestly, I think that we need to put supply-side reform in place. We need to sort Northern Ireland out. I mean, there are things to sort out. But if you say to me, on the big picture, is Brexit a good thing? Was it the right thing to do? All I can say to you is, taking back your freedom, taking back the independence of your country, putting into the hands of ordinary people the power to hire and fire those that are making their laws. Hey, I believe in freedom, I believe in liberty, I believe the nation state at the moment represents the best way to do it. No, I'm absolutely proud of campaigning for Brexit, achieving Brexit, and I believe that it's the first brick out of the globalist EU wall. We come back here in 10 years' time, the European Union will not be there in its current construct, and I believe that'll be a very, very good thing. Eurosceptics.
They're liking this. So you believe there's going to be a breakup of the EU?
Inevitably, you've got two problems. You've got the north-south divide, because you've got a currency that should never, ever have been imposed upon the people of the Mediterranean. I mean, Greek GDP is down about 27% over the last 12 years. The country has absolutely been pushed into poverty. Italy, I think, is where the break may come. The Greeks kind of have accepted this new status, which is very, very sad. The Italians aren't going to accept it. I mean, just look at the new Italian Prime Minister. I mean, talk about fiery, goodness me, frightens the life out of me. So at some point, the Italians are going to rebel because it doesn't work. And look, let's be honest about it. The euro's been great for Germany. It's been great for Germany. It's given them a currency 20% lower than it would have been, great for German car exports and all the rest of it. Probably economically, for the Netherlands, it's been relatively neutral, but it involves a huge ceding of democratic rights and power. For the Mediterranean, it's a disaster. So number one, the euro is going to break up. The ECB do not have the tools ultimately to stop it. And then secondly, you've got the cultural divide, east to west. And, in Hungary, in Poland, in Slovakia, in the Czech Republic, they talk about pregnant women, and in the West we've started to talk about pregnant people. There is a huge cultural divide going on here. And the Poles and Hungarians are not going along with this woke nonsense. It isn't going to happen, and you see increasingly fines being levied against these countries, all sorts of motions of censure being passed against them. So north-south, it's breaking up economically. East-west, it's breaking up culturally. As I say, I mean, look, I want a Europe in which we trade together, cooperate together, be friends with each other, although for the British and French, that's never going to be entirely possible. But, I want a Europe of trade, and I completely understand why, in 1951, a coal and steel agreement was put in place between France and Germany. I completely understand that. The more we trade with each other, the more we interact with each other, the more, I was going to say social intercourse, but be careful about that one. But the more social intercourse there is between countries, the more likely they're going to be good friends and never go to war. And the really interesting point is this. There are many today who will say to you, look, Nigel, you may criticise the bureaucracy, you may criticise its economic direction, you may criticise how bad it is for small entrepreneurs, which it is, but it's kept the peace. Here's the point. Never in the history of humanity has one functioning national democracy gone to war with another functioning national democracy. And far from fostering democracy, what the EU is now doing is taking democracy away from the member states. Provided Europe is democratic, provided Europe is free, there will not be another war in Europe. And that's the real point we need to get home.
I'm a big supporter of democracy. I'm not an anarchist. I believe in democracy. But right now, especially in the UK, it's very difficult to think who you would vote for. We have a very weak leader in the Labour Party in Keir Starmer, and then we have a poor Liz Truss. But even on the front benches and the back benches, we don't seem to have good leaders. We don't seem to have people with strong, standout opinions. Why has everyone gone to the centre ground? Why have we lost this in politics? Because we need strong leadership to get ideas like Bitcoin delivered.
We need people with convictions. I mean, you and I are sitting here talking with this audience. We have convictions. And we're not afraid to put them out there. And if we get a bit of stick back, well, we'll live with that. I really believe it's been the growth of the career politician. The career politician who goes to the best school, goes to the best university, leaves university, becomes a researcher in an MP's office, becomes a member of parliament, doesn't have any hobbies or interests outside of politics, spends his weekends with the same group of people he spent the week with. They all, in the end, then marry each other's sisters. And
not their own sisters. Their friends.
no, they're not as bad as that yet.
They're not from Cornwall.
But that's unfair on the Cornish. There'll be somebody here from Cornwall. I know there will be. No, and that's what you've got. A very, very narrow group of people who know almost nothing about the world outside their own little circle, hence the lack of knowledge on Bitcoin and elsewhere. And regularly in the European Parliament, when I was there and doing my bit to charm them, as I always did, I would get up and say, none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives. And they'd all howl and scream, but I tell you what, I wasn't wrong. So politics has become a career. And I also think in the UK's case, the electoral system, the first past the post, constituency by constituency, well, what's it given us? 12 years of utterly useless Tory government. And I think the whole thing needs a shake-up. I suspect we will get a Labour government under Starmer. I mean, he's not very inspiring, but he's also not as scary as Jeremy Corbyn was. No. He's not scary. Are we worried he'll put up taxes? Well, the Tories have put up taxes. The Tories haven't put in place a single supply-side reform to help entrepreneurs and small businesses. So I suspect we'll get a Labour government. There'll be a fair contingent of Liberal Democrats in there as well. And I think we'll then get a form of proportional representation. And as soon as we get that, we'll see a very different kind of politics. I won the 2014 and the 2019 European elections, the second one by a landslide. I won 2 national elections that were contested under PR, but under first past the post, 4 million votes and 1 seat. And I think when we get proportional representation, we'll see people back in politics with real convictions. Who knows? I might even give it another go myself.
Why do you think you split the crowd? When I tell my family I'm interviewing you, I know one person's going to give me the thumbs up and one's going to give me the thumbs down. And that's a nationwide thing. Do you think it's really just aligned with Brexit, or do you think it's something else?
Oh, look, we either like people or we don't like people. We like people's style or we don't like people's style. I mean, those that like me think I'm brave, fearless. Those that don't like me think I'm bloody rude. But you can't be all things to all people. And all through the history of mankind, we have splits and different opinions on different subjects. And the point of politics is to argue for what you believe in and to persuade 50% plus one to go along with that line. So look, clearly, there are people that don't like me. Clearly there are people that disagree with me very strongly. But I think actually, to be honest, I was pretty demonised by the newspapers in particular.
Well, I
mean, it's so unfair. And some of it was horrible.
Yeah, but
it really hurt, some of it. They said things like I was a gambler, a drinker, a smoker, a womanizer.
Sound pretty cool.
Well, it really hurt because it was all true. I mean, it really did hurt.
I asked the question for a reason, because not only do we have a problem in politics, not only do we have a problem in money, but we have a problem with media, we have a problem with the press. And the reason I asked the point is because I thought you were going to say this. You're going to say, you split people. Do you think politicians have become too scared to have strong convictions behind ideas?
I think there are 2 things to say to that. Number one, they've gone into it with the wrong motive. The number of university students I've met over the years. How do I get into politics, Nigel? And I always say the same thing. Go and get a blooming job, and when you're 35 to 40, think about perhaps then having a go at politics. But secondly, social media, the cell phone, with its camera, with its video recording ability, has made life for footballers, rock stars, politicians, much, much harder. There is a much bigger level of intrusion into your life. And, if you think what the Sun newspaper can write about you hurts, well, have a look at what gets put on social media and understand the influence that has on your wife, your husband, your kids, your parents. This stuff really, really does hurt people, and it hurts those around you as well. And I think it's because of the viciousness of this that people have all pulled in to this centre ground. I mean, I've only got one regret. I've only got one regret about my political life, and that is the impact it had on my family. And I say that, and I mean that, and it's been bloody difficult for them.
Yeah, I can imagine. We're in Amsterdam, we're in the weed capital of Europe, a country which has a politically unpopular idea, which we haven't seen the breakdown of society in Amsterdam by having marijuana legal. We've got a room full of Europeans. Anyone in here who's thinking, right, they fear, because a lot of people here fear the EU. We've seen some bills they've tried to pass with regards to regulating wallets or regulating mining.
Yep.
There's a constant attack on Bitcoin. What can people in this room do to make a difference?
Oh, you know what? It's a really interesting point, this, because a lot of people say, I feel powerless. Actually, all of you have got a lot more power than you realise. You've got your immediate social circle. You've got your contacts, whether it's on Getter, whether it's on WhatsApp, whether it's on wherever it is. You've also got the ability to hound, albeit politely, but to hound your elected representatives at every single tier and level, from local government all the way up to the top. As I was building the Purple Revolution, from literally a few dozen of us in a pub to millions of supporters across the country, as I was building that, the phrase I used to use, I'd say to audiences, crowds like this, I'd say, join the people's army. The people's army. You take your place in the ranks and say, from today, I'm going to do something. I'm not going to sit, at home, watching the telly, screaming about how terrible this is. I'm actually going to do my bit, and we can all be campaigners, we can all be influencers, and if enough of us have the same idea at the same time and do something about it, well, just a few of us stamping our feet becomes millions of us stamping our feet, and then you get the tidal wave that you need to overcome the establishment and to get real change.
And when you've done that, as you said, it started with a few guys in a pub,
yeah,
and then you go into every pub in the country. What were the things that you learned? What were the things that made a real difference to your campaign, where you had a stepped change difference?
I think language is really important. I think the way that political figures, or the way that campaign figures, the way they address people, the way they come across on a podcast or a radio show or whatever it may be, I think the style and the approach matters hugely. I think there's a general feeling that those in politics, in campaign groups, they're often, during interviews or podcasts, they're often trying to show off how clever they are, how influential they are, and they use a language that kind of goes over the top of most folk. I think the great skill with communication, the great skill with building a movement that changes things, is to have direct, almost as if when you're talking to somebody on a podcast, you're not talking to a huge crowd, you're talking to one person. And if you think of it in those terms, you're talking to one person, and you use language and examples that everybody understands. And, I was accused by the Times newspaper repeatedly of oversimplifying the message. Well, all that meant was people heard it and liked it, So being straightforward, having direct communication, using language that is accessible, I think that's a very important point.
Excellent. Right, we've got a couple of minutes left. Don't know what that was. We have a couple of minutes left.
Yep.
I'm also conscious you've been involved with GB News, another socially unpopular idea in the UK. Talk about help people understand. In the UK, we have Sky News and the BBC. That They're neither particularly have strong opinions anymore. What are the challenges you faced with GB News about getting them out and getting their message out? Specifically with regards to being accepted onto the networks and with growing the revenue model through advertising. Because I was chatting to the guy backstage and explaining.
Yeah, Liam Halligan, who's here as who's the economics editor at GB News. Yeah, look, I mean, the very thought that a new TV station would be set up that would not obsess daily about carbon dioxide and climate change, would not be anti-Brexit, would not support big government. The very thought that a channel would exist that would be centre-right, but allow all shades of opinion and all shades of debate, I mean, that gave them kittens in the establishment. And now that we are set up, what we face at the moment is quite a big advertising ban. A big advertising ban from some of the leading advertising agencies. And yet, if you say to them, we'll point to one example in the 16 months we've been going, of something that's been said that you think was insightful or hateful, they cannot point to a single example. So again, it's the same as the Bitcoin argument. We are a challenger coming into a market where there is a happy, established status quo. We think they're doing a rotten job. We don't think they're giving all sides of the argument. And I tell you what, there wouldn't be a cat's chance in hell of the BBC or Sky News or ITV being in this hall sitting with you today. We from GB News have flown over this morning with a team of 5, and we're going to talk about Bitcoin, not just today, but in the weeks and months to come. And we'll do it partly as an education campaign, but we believe in it.
Well, thank you, Nigel. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you.
I'm sure we're going to follow up you and I at some point. You have delivered a politically unpopular idea, and I look forward to spending some time with you.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Magazine live desk at Bitcoin Amsterdam, sponsored by BitGo. I'm Natalie Brunel, and I'm joined by Jeff Booth and Greg Foss. What an incredible talk by Nigel and Peter McCormack. You know, one of the things that really stood out is at the end when he was talking about the power of the individual. And recently I talked to Lawrence Lepard, who I know we're all friends with, and he talked about how, you know, we have red versus blue. And yet the problem is not that, it's the people versus the elites versus the corrupt central banks. And I love that that was the message, the takeaway at the end.
I would 100% agree. It's amazing how the Bitcoin community is growing and also permeating various levels of government. It indicates a degree of thinking outside the box that makes me so happy. You know, we had the prior debt conference with Dylan Leclerc talking about 3 of the 4 guys believe that the EU is going to collapse, probably, I'm reading, you know, within 10 years. Well, you need to prepare for that. You need politicians that are going to prepare. One of the quotes was, the first central bank to adopt Bitcoin is going to win this race. Well, look, if you have people like Nigel Farage pushing it and promoting it, that helps out Britain, that, by the way, is in a heap of trouble right now because of their gilt market.
Yep.
Which G7 nation central bank do you think will first embrace Bitcoin?
I am working hard as I can on Canada, but I don't think it'll be Canada. But here's the crazy thing. Jeff and I know Canada sold all our gold. We have no gold in our central bank. Now, Jeff and I have worked with some politicians in Canada to advance. Jeff much more than myself. But look, Canada is natural resource rich. Canada is energy. Jeff, take it away. I mean, we think we can do it.
Yeah, but Nigel's comment is really valid, because we make a difference in the world we see. Our ideas create the world we see, and as more people understand that they can make a difference by just moving to a new system, more and more that creates more power in the new system. That brings more people to the new system. So you could yell at the clouds all day long about what's going to happen in the existing system, but it also opens up an opportunity for every new politician to speak the truth and start creating the new system. So it's powerful, and that's why Bitcoin is literally unstoppable.
And if I may add, it opens up a game theory. Once one nation does go, watch what's happening with El Salvador. That's going to be beautiful for the Central American countries.
For sure.
Well, then it also all of a
Yeah.
sudden permeates other levels of government at larger nations.
Exactly. And I love what you say. Fight for the world you want to see, not the one that you're in now. And that's what we're doing with Bitcoin. Coming up next is The Struggle for Freedom with Leopoldo Lopez and Alex Gladstein. Don't go away.